Welcome, sales hackers. I hope you are having an excellent morning if you're on the West Coast, and a great afternoon if you're joining us from the East Coast. And if you're from anywhere else in the world, I hope your day is wrapping up nicely. And of course, given the date, I hope that you took some time to remember the senseless tragedy that did take place on this day. Of course, our thoughts are with the troops and those affected by this awful event. But the good in the world always overshadows the bad. So I think it's important to focus all our energy there today. But anyway, switching gears to the topic of today. Today, we're talking about how to get RevOps to talk to sales, creating alignment for massive revenue growth. There always seems to be, this friction between sales and RevOps. Sales gets all the glory. They're running for the touchdowns. And then, while RevOps is often kind of left in the shadows. So we're going to try and look at ways to get that alignment tighter, which, of course, has a big impact on the bottom line. And the conversation is going to be centered around really three things. So best practices for bridging the gap between sales and revenue operations, 2 tactical tips to use data with sales automation to free up your sales team, and how sales ops and sales can only win together when they're working together. And before I introduce my 2 awesome guests, bear with me a little bit. A few housekeeping items. Number 1, this will be recorded. So if you get dragged into a meeting or have a colleague that you think could benefit from our conversation today, please hang tight. We will send over the recording via email after we wrap up. Number 2, this is going to be a Q&A style webinar. So I've got some juicy questions prepared to get as much actionable insight from our 2 guests as possible. But of course, I can always use your help. After all, these webinars are very much for you, our community. So jump on the chat feature, introduce yourself, what organization you're with, your title, and of course, any relevant questions that you have as we're having our conversation. All right, now we have that out of the way. I want to introduce Laura Cornaca, Senior Sales Operations Manager at Financial Force, and Hilary Caviglia, Director of Sales Operations at Barracuda. Laura and Hilary, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the Sales Hacker community.
Thanks for having us. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you both. And as always, I do like to add, a touch more color just for the attendees that are joining us. And so Laura, I'll start with you. So Laura Cornaca, we were talking before this, and you've spent 4 years now at Financial Force. You actually started out in sales and was really the first time where you saw a lot of success, and you got the opportunity to actually...
I'm going to cut you off there.
Please do.
This was the first time, Financial Force for me was the first time I actually felt like I wasn't seeing the success that I, honestly, I'm going to get my own horn, that I was used to seeing, right? Because I work hard. And that's what really triggered that opportunity to have the conversation about, okay, well, why not? What are the operational things that are preventing sales reps like me from getting to where they want to be? And especially when they're putting that hard work in. And I got a great opportunity to actually move over to the ops side with our brand new VP of Ops.
Sweet. Okay. Apologize. So I got that backwards. So you had a lot of success in the sales realm, got to Financial Force, and you're like, oh, not working. The tips, tricks you were used to having weren't working at Financial Force. So you dove into the processes, tried to figure out why, and hence getting the attention of your VP of Ops. Is that's more in the right realm?
Yeah.
Got it.
Thanks.
Perfect. And so now you went on to work on those challenges that you identified, and embraced new technology and became a critical part of the process that enabled Financial Force to hit your 40% plus growth rate, which is extremely impressive. And also a lot of kind of startup history in your background. I know at one of your former companies, you were like employee 14 and the very first territory sales rep. And prior to that was actually employee 3. So with all of that, I know there's a lot of figuring out how things work. So assuming that's a large part of why you're able to do what you do on a larger scale now. And a fun fact as well, we were talking before this, and you're originally from Poland, and when you moved to the US, you spoke no English. And zero. And by the time you moved into the next grade in school, you were labeled as the class chatterbox.
Yeah.
So
I think we'll have a good time today.
Definitely. That's awesome. So you picked it up quick, hey? Just immerse yourself and made it happen.
I never shut up.
And here we are. Love it. All right, switching gears over to Hillary. So Hillary has spent 3 years at Barracuda, a experienced professional in sales ops, customer success management as well. So we got that piece. And you've always really been driven to maximize results through analytics and execution of process efficiency. You were telling me you really enjoy problem solving as well as developing solutions and plans to achieve, strategic goals. You consider yourself a collaborative leader and adaptive to ever-changing conditions, which is very important in this crazy landscape where technology is moving so quickly and processes are changing so fast. And in the past, you've worked at companies like RiseSmart.com, Precision Information, and Fair Home Lending as well.
Yeah. And so similar to Laura, I actually fell into sales operations a little bit on accident, was in a business operations role and just realized that I was overlapping a lot with what a lot of other people were doing, and being the small company that it was, there was opportunity to kind of look into other areas and see where there was opportunity to improve, and identified that our sales team really needed some help from an ops perspective, and kind of tried to partner with the VP of that company, and she quickly saw the value that I could provide and got me switched over to her team. So kind of similar background to Laura, no surprise there.
Awesome. I love it. Well, we've definitely got a good, scope. We've got sales background, we've got customer success, we've got biz ops background, all now under the umbrella of sales ops. So I'm excited for where this conversation is going to go, because there's a lot of different things, ways we can kind of chalk up your background and experience. So let's dive into it. And Hillary, I'm going to start with you on just kind of setting the stage a little bit. Like, what does the background on the structure of your sales team look like? Where does sales ops report to? And does your business handle, mostly inbound or outbound? And I think you may, there you go. Perfect.
Thankfully, Zoom told me. So we have a sales team here at Barracuda between 350 to 400 people, all inclusive. So a worldwide sales team, and that includes our renewals team as well. We have a number of folks globally. I would say that about 50% of that number is in the US, and I'm pretty focused. I am a global team member for the sales ops team, but I'm pretty focused on the America structure. So I'm going to kind of speak a lot to that today. We have an inside team that's pretty heavy. We've got a lot of inbound that comes in. We've got about 75% of our leads that are coming in are inbound, both from marketing that we're doing and then also from our channel. And then probably about 25% are outbound. And so we have a smaller team, not small, but a smaller team out in the field that consists of, account executives and then strategic account executives. Sales ops in our organization actually reports into finance. And I always love hearing, different organizations and how their reporting structure is. I personally really like reporting into finance for a couple of reasons. I would say the first reason because we really are seen as a neutral party between sales and marketing. And I think that that's helped a lot with some of the projects that we've worked on, and have helped to kind of build credibility throughout the organization, not just with sales.
That makes total sense. So having it roll up to finance, you can act as that third party, and you're not on sales team or you're not a marketing team, and you can kind of further increase that alignment.
Yeah, we're just fighting for the business. Yeah.
I love that. That's cool. I've actually never heard of that, but I think it makes total sense. Laura, I'm going to ask the same question to set the stage at Financial Force as well. So just background of the structure, where does sales ops report to, and what's the inbound, outbound kind of ratio?
Sure. It's interesting that you mentioned you've never heard that before, because for the last couple of months, I myself have been reporting to our CFO as well. But we did just change that up again, so I can give you guys a little bit more detail on how the structure is today, maybe a little bit of color on what it was too, because that is always an interesting thing. I think that alignment is something people are sort of testing out, or at least we've definitely done that on our side. And to Hillary's point, the more of a neutral party you can seem, I think the better it ultimately works for everyone. From a sales perspective, we're also a global company. We have about 100 reps, and our sales reps are responsible essentially for inbound and outbound. So in terms of like our sales reps, and then we do also have a BDR team that collaborates with our account executives on the outbounding effort. I would say it kind of changes year over year. We have also a very strong partnership with Salesforce, so they are a great channel for us, but it's a channel that we have to proactively engage. So we kind of lump it in an outbound bucket in a sense, and it's probably 60-40 inbound, outbound at this point. We've seen it sort of fluctuate, and we're trying to find what is that right sweet spot for us. What else? We do also operate on a global sense. I mentioned that, but primarily within Western Europe and then Australia outside of North America. I will also be primarily speaking about North America, but I can kind of touch on the global environment as well, since we all work really closely together. Currently, we're a team of 9 ops folks, and that's actually across sales, renewals, and deal desk. While sales operations today now reports into our CRO, deal desk and renewal ops reports into the CFO, but we all used to report into one place together under a VP of operations. So because of that, we've been able to really remain very closely aligned. So while we're kind of siloed still, like we're always having cross-functional meetings and making sure that that connection stays in place, and it's been working out really well.
Nice. So talk a little bit about, so when did you switch over to the CRO, reporting to the CRO?
Earlier this year. Yeah, it's relatively recent. It's actually the first time we've had a CRO. So when our prior VP of Ops had left the organization, we weren't sure what to do in terms of replacement. We have this amazing CRO come in, and it just kind of made sense to try this avenue.
And have you seen any immediate pros or immediate cons from that switch?
I don't think there are any cons. I think part of the benefit of, and this is probably just unique to our experience so far, the benefit of being able to really, I think, go smoothly through these kinds of organizational changes is that most of us have worked together for a while already. So we're really tight-knit. And one of the things that our organization has done really well, regardless of where we've reported to, is to maintain that connection to the sales folks directly. And that's leadership as well as, our actual reps. So I think having that synergy puts us in a place where we can deal with organizational change, where I've seen at other companies, a change like that can cause a lot of issues, a lot of turnover. It's just sort of hard to get in that groove again. So I think we've almost sort of put ourselves in a position where, all right, change is a normal part of what happens at a tech company these days. So wherever we go, we'll be okay. But I do like this revenue-oriented now component being introduced into ops. Actually, Hillary, you and I were talking about this earlier, right? How we kind of like the idea of this conversation today being under revenue ops, because both of our titles are within sales operations, but when we look at what we do and when we think about the processes that support an efficient sales team, it goes way beyond just what's in sales operations. You have to understand those other pieces of the business, and you have to have that alignment with them too.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that that's really where you start to provide value as sales ops, is where you're not just looking at that initial phase of the sales cycle. You're looking at everything end to end and pulling it all together so that there's a really clear process and everyone knows what to expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Hillary, do you want to take that a step further? Just maybe for those people in our that are listening, I think there is some confusion around like, what is revenue ops and what is sales ops, and what's the main difference there?
So sure, and I can share my perspective on it, and I don't know that I've got a textbook definition of either of them.
I guess think it exists yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it does. So anyone else, please feel free to chime in. You know, when I look at when I think of sales operations, I think of what happens in the sales process, right? What happens when you get a lead and how that flows through to an opportunity, and then how it flows through to closed one. There's, you know, the concept of lead to quote, and then quote to cash. And so to me, that kind of spans sales operations. Revenue operations is that plus what happens after the deal closes. There could be order management involved in that. There could be renewals processes involved in that. Like, we're very, very involved in our renewals processes here, and we provide a great deal of support to our renewals team worldwide, both with data, with process, and with, you know, process improvement. That's always a big piece of sales operations or revenue operations. And then also the partnerships that you can have with other, you know, cross-functional teams within the organization, right? So we partner with finance a lot. We partner with the product teams a lot to get them some of the data that they need. So to me, that kind of is that more all-encompassing, not specifically looking at one piece of the sales cycle, is what revenue ops is.
Makes total sense. So like this holistic approach of everything that has to do with you know, bringing revenue in. Laura, anything to add on that piece there?
Not much to add. I mean, I'm in total agreement with that. I think it's that ability to sort of zoom out on everything that you do and understand the macro vision of everything. I think so often we see that like pinpoint focus on whether it's a pinpoint solution, but you create the issues when you don't think about the gaps between that solution and the next solution, or that process and the next process. So being able to actually have that big picture vision, I think is a great way to define RevOps.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, that's kind of a good segue into my next question. So we looked at the kind of the macro level, and that's RevOps, but getting back into more the nitty gritty of sales ops, because that's a part of it. Let's talk a little bit about inbound handling versus outbound. And Laura, I'm going to shoot this one over to you to kick us off. What does your process look like today at Financial Force when getting leads to salespeople, and the difference between inbound and outbound?
Yeah, so we are all in on systems and automation when it comes to leads. We started out with having your typical, you know, Marketo, but the marketing and sales stack grew exponentially as we started to look at those processes. And we relied very heavily on lead automation driven through a tool called Lean Data. For us, the idea of like, you know, we have a kind of internal program called No Lead Left Behind. Dropping those leads through the cracks is just like, that just makes everyone cringe. Marketing, sales, I mean, no one wants that. So having a system that enables us to handle all the territory routing for our inbound to the right BDR, or in certain occasions, potentially the right sales rep, we try to make sure that our highest quality leads are accelerated into the hands of a person. So sometimes there might be a gap here and there in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes the quality of the lead, maybe it's a top target account. We actually make sure that the rep and the BDR is involved and notified right away. The idea is like accelerate basically as fast as we can. But as well as have fallback mechanisms in place, which again, for us are through Lean Data, to prevent sort of that leaky funnel anywhere in there. So if we can't find a lead, you know, kind of the right hand owner of the lead will round robin it out in a way that somewhat still makes sense, right? Potentially based on the information we have about the lead, just to make sure that it ultimately ends up in someone's hands instead of nowhere, just because we can find the right place to go. So having those kinds of checkpoints across all of the systems, that's really big for us. And then outreach is really sort of the second component. So any other kind of tool like that, I think, becomes really critical in your efforts. We use it for inbound and outbound equally. We had actually started out with a pilot for the sales team, and while it was heavily used already in the BDR team, and we just rolled it out to the entire organization not too long ago, and everyone is so excited because it really changes the game on what it is that you can do. That consistency factor in terms of lead follow-up makes the biggest difference. Consistency and being able to do more with your time, essentially, especially as a sales rep, where time to prospect sometimes can be really difficult. But like in our organization, when we sit back and we do the math, we know that our reps have to bring some business in for them to make their numbers. It can't just be all relied on the inbound.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. So I think a huge pushback I hear when talking to sales leaders, and when they talk about setting like lead automation and sales engagement tools and all these things, like it sounds great. I don't have the time, because maybe they don't have a full 9-person sales ops team. How long did it take Financial Force, like the upfront work, to get these systems implemented?
Yeah. So at the time, we did not have a 9-person team either.
Okay.
I was the primary person involved in the implementation of both systems, and I just heavily partnered with marketing. But ultimately, there were about maybe 3 people in the room: a marketing person, myself, and our Salesforce admin that was put onto the project. While both outreach and lean data, for example, aren't the most Salesforce admin heavy tools, we try to keep also our admins involved in everything. We want them to be able to support us. So that was actually really critical for that project. And honestly, getting everything up and running only took us a couple of months. And I literally mean maybe like 2 months between the solutions. Where I think the bigger challenge is sort of refining how they're working. There's a lot of work that comes in after. Right. And if working with these companies, they've done a really great job of providing like a consultative approach on how to get started, so that you don't implement like a monster that you then sort of can't catch up behind and optimize. So if you take the baby steps and then take, iterative sort of approach of refining things, you can kind of do it in a way that's going to scale really well with a really small team. Awesome. The what's the word I'm looking for? The governance piece around it. In something like outreach, that's really big. As long as you implement it in a way that you don't enable everyone to create their own thing, then you can keep it in control. So if you don't put those guardrails around it, you're going to have all of a sudden, what they call sequences, right? You have like 100 sequences in outreach that are all different, created by different reps. And your messaging is going to start to get muddled, and you're going to lose out on critical information around how effective are these things, right? So that's another really valuable component of these solutions. They give you data on how well is your messaging working? Do you need a different subject line? Who opens this? Who clicks on that? It's a lot of really great feedback you can get, so long as you're not working across hundreds of these, because then it's just, you don't have the volume to sort of get it. So I think it's very doable. Again, sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but to implement with a small team, as long as you're smart about taking the small steps to get to where you ultimately want to be. Yeah.
So being very proactive, it's not a set it and forget it kind of situation, because it can get overwhelming if you open it up to too many people too fast.
Totally. And for everything that we do, we get everyone that's going to be an end user involved. So I think like something like a tool where you're going to be sending, your outbound messaging throughout or whatever, responding to leads, pick a couple of your best BDRs, get them into the project team, work with their management on that. Like that creates your internal champions. It's going to give you their perspective. You're doing the whole buy-in thing. So that when the tool does get rolled out, your adoption is going to be a lot better, and you've got resources in the field that can help support the other users versus having yourself as the only, point of support.
Yeah. I think that's a great point there, is getting the actual end user involved, throughout the whole implementation, so they feel empowered when they actually get it in their hands.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And most of the time, reps get excited to do stuff like that. They want to be a part of contributing to the changes. Absolutely,
for sure. And Hillary, so I'll go to you. Same question. What does the process look like today for Barracuda? For inbound leads and outbound leads, and getting those over to salespeople?
Absolutely. So we've had a really similar process since the day the company started in 2004. We have not changed a lot, and it's because it's worked fairly well. I'm sure there are a lot of other processes out there that we could follow, and actually we're going to be re-implementing Salesforce in the next couple of months, and so that's one of the things that we're actively looking at. I know it's scary.
Just a small project.
Yeah. So we use what we call queues, which really aren't queues necessarily. Some of them are queues, and I'm sure any of you guys who have been a Salesforce admin or know very much about Salesforce understand lead queues, where you basically can route different types of leads into different types of queues. We have a territory approach, and so we have different people who could be picking up different leads at any given time, and so we don't route them to one specific person. We have a 2-hour SLA, and it's a first come, first pickup. Basically we have a queue where the leads are routed to, and the reps go and pick them up as needed, and management has really good visibility into that queue. We have notifications if something's been sitting in there for too long. And so there's, a lot of checks and balances on what's happening there that way. And it's pretty out of the box and pretty low budget, but it has worked for us so far. So we'll see what the new instance brings about for us. I've heard of lean data, and I'm excited to dig into that one a little bit more too.
Yeah, lean data is an awesome tool, and a good partner of Sales Hackers. They're doing cool stuff over there. Okay, awesome. So let's talk about, I'm going to make this one purposely a little more general. So you can take this question, wherever you want to kind of go with it. And Hillary, I'll start with you. What's one piece of, key advice for getting sales ops to talk to sales?
So yeah, that's a really great question. And I had a hard time answering with only one piece of advice. So I'll start with one.
We'll take it all.
So, the way that I look at it is you have to build credibility, right? You have to be a credible resource for your sales team. And I think there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Always provide value, I guess, is kind of the way that I would summarize what I have to say. And I'll just start by telling a story. So when I first joined Barracuda, I actually had a really hard time getting into the sales ops organization. And I would say a really hard time, but it was a couple of weeks until I really was able to build relationships into the sales organization. And I think it was partially a cultural thing, but partially because they didn't understand. They'd never really had ops before, and they didn't understand what ops could do for them. And so one of the first projects that I worked on was, they said that they wanted to go out and do a campaign, a call campaign with all of their customers. And at the time, we didn't have a lot of budget that we were going to go spend on this. It was pretty low budget. And so I took it upon myself to gather all the data and take that and put it into a format that was really easily accessible by the sales rep, and gave them every detail that they needed in one view, so that all they had to do was pick up the phone and dial, right? And I think that helped to build a lot of credibility. I think it got a lot of visibility. We had a lot of dashboards that were kind of showing what the progress was on it. We were able to generate quite a bit of pipeline within the first couple of months. And I think a lot of people hit their number that month and quarter because of that campaign. And so I think that was one thing that helped me to build credibility. I think another thing is, when a salespeople don't always know how to communicate what they're looking for. And so I think one thing that you can do as a sales ops person, especially one if you're really interested in process improvement, is go take time to sit down with a salesperson and ask them, what is the most painful thing that you do on a daily basis? Tell me what it is that you're doing that's painful, and let me help you fix that. And there are some things that you're going to be able to help them fix, and there are some things that you're not going to be able to touch. And hopefully you can at least give them reasoning as to why it's that way, and that will help them. But I think that's another way that you can really provide value to your sales team. And I think the more you provide value to your sales team, the more they begin to lean on you, and then the more credibility you have with them, and the more they value your input, right? And so, that led me to being the key business partner from the sales ops perspective to our America's SVP. And that's my favorite role in the many hats that I wear in sales operations. My favorite is being his business partner, because we get to be strategic and we get to talk about all these, amazing plans that we have for the future, and then how to go execute those. And so I think that's I guess that's what I would have to say in terms of getting that conversation going.
That's awesome. And I would definitely agree with your statement there, where sales folks don't always know what they want. Being in sales a long time myself, I think we're all looking for a silver bullet, but we don't necessarily know what that is, because we're we got so much going on every day to day that sometimes we can't actually look back at that macro level that we talked about before. And so, when you come with the value and you're bringing the credibility, and it's essentially taking stuff off my plate, right? Taking anything that I don't have to do is going to make me a more effective seller, right? Because then I just have more output for my, high impact activities. So
exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah. And automation, I mean, the more you can automate, the better. I think that I completely will, bandwagon on what Laura said there. So.
Yeah. Awesome. And Lauren, any advice further to that on getting sales ops essentially on your side or getting sales on your side as a sales operations leader?
Yeah, I love this question actually, because having been on both sides, I kind of laugh to myself sometimes when I'm in different situations about the assumptions that I realize both sides make. Like, sales assumes certain things are really hard to fix. And then, I'll hear a problem from someone in sales and it's as easy as fixing an account layout page on something small like that.
Yeah.
Like that's actually a literal example where account pages were loading so slowly to the point where people were like, I don't want to enter data. And it's very quick and easy for everyone else to think, well, sales reps are lazy. They don't want to enter data. No, actually, we made it really hard for them to do it because it was a tech issue. And it turns out we could fix it really quickly. And then vice versa, I think operations sometimes makes assumptions about what's happening in the sales process. And that's a really big one for me. Like, I love putting on my sales hat on and being able to voice on behalf of sales that no, in reality, this actually isn't how things happen in sales, and I think kind of, Hillary, you mentioned this, sitting down with a sales rep is probably the best thing you can do. You're going to learn things that you had no idea were happening, problems you you didn't have any visibility into, and potentially sort of clear up any misconceptions you might have. Just the amount of context you can get for, an insight or something you might be spotting in the data from a person can potentially change, what it is that needs to happen there. So I think not making assumptions and really sort of understanding that you don't know what you don't know. And the only way you can find out is by having that direct relationship with sales leaders and the sales folks, that are first line. I think, and it kind of goes into everything Hillary was saying too, like by having that relationship, that's where you're going to have those champions built in. And then everything else that you want to do moving forward is probably going to get done a lot easier once you have that trust established by bringing people into it. So showing them that you're hearing them, understanding them, all of that based on, talking, right? Just the best way to get them to talk to each other is force yourselves to talk to each other. If you don't have that culture in the organization, find the most friendly sales leader that you've got, start a bi-weekly meeting with them, see sort of the things that naturally come out of it. Become honestly like a person they can vent to about some of their challenges. And you're naturally going to find really great ways to optimize the sales process out of that.
That's awesome. Ton of good points there. And I think it's so funny to see the similarities between having to go and internally, sell this idea of making their lives easier with your sales organizations, and actually same challenges that they're kind of having and like going out and you being a frontline like AE, right? You have to, lead with empathy and understand them and build trust. So it's funny, a lot of similarities there.
And actually, because I love your story, Hillary, I just thought of something else. And it also sort of speaks to how what you are doing in sales ops really does need to go beyond sales ops. We also had a moment in time where we noticed there was a part of the sales process that was taking a lot longer than we expected it to. It seemed like all the critical things were buttoned up. And we realized that we were actually having a very hard time finding referrals within our existing customer base for the specific things that a customer wanted to know about. Because we sell an ERP solution, it's complex. Sometimes the questions are very targeted about a specific piece of the solution. And no one was really capturing that stuff on the sales side because, you usually hand off to your CSM team. And we had to really partner with CSMs to figure out a way for us to start capturing the customers that, we can see their pain points on the opportunities, but did we fix those pain points and are they happy about it? Great. And then how can sales find that out so that we don't have one person that's using tribal knowledge to try to think of the right customer to provide as a reference, you know? So little things like that. And then we ended up building out a really great referral and reference process around that.
Nice.
It's so funny that you say that, because we literally went through the exact same issue at the last company that I was at. I mean, to the T, the exact same problem. So
yeah, you have a giant enterprise deal on the table or whatever, any deal, and it's literally the reference that is the only thing that's holding it back. And that should just never happen.
Absolutely. So do you want to talk through that communication a little bit? Like, how did you actually set that up? Like, if I'm an AE and I've got this big deal and they're like this a very specific challenge, and like I need a referral and then we're good to go. What does the AE at your organization now kind of go about doing?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did also kind of really encourage is to start that referral process a lot earlier. We have a 6-stage sales process, and we realized that everyone is going to ask for the referrals like at the tail end of stage 5. They should really be doing it at the end of stage 4 in our world and the early part of stage 5, at least that process of sending that request in. And what we did is we built a custom object. So because everyone in our world is working in Salesforce, our CSMs are services implementation teams that are also capturing all these good nuggets about what a customer is doing really well. They have a dedicated place in Salesforce to capture that information. And that information is essentially then searchable to sales through this reference object. So we've sort of narrowed it down to a certain list of topics. And then as a CSM maybe has a QBR with their customer, they can sort of validate and identify areas that this customer can talk to and is willing to talk to another customer about. So we kind of cover 2 things. They're the topics at which they might be knowledgeable about and whether they're actually willing to have those conversations. So right off the bat, that saves you like, you know, a week at least sometimes in terms of just figuring out, will the customer even agree to talk to another person about this?
Yeah, that's great. And a fairly simple solution that you could implement, you know, it's not going to take a massive amount of time. I really, really like that.
And that's the thing too, like it didn't start out, I think, even as complex as it is now. I don't want to say complex, as comprehensive as it is now. We started out with like a really basic list of things. We have, you know, 2 really big solutions. One's an accounting solution. We always know that these 5 topics are big in accounting. Boom, that's the accounting part of the list. It was really simple to begin with. And then it kind of just evolved over time.
Nice.
Yeah, our experience actually with creating a program like that was really similar, and I think we went through the same thing where we evolved it over time. And then a couple things that we actually were able to add on, and I'm referring to the last company that I was with, was we actually were able to pull down reporting really quickly to understand who is the most, usable reference for this specific deal based on certain criteria. When was the last time they were used? Because we would try to give, a little period of time between every reference that we would give. And then we also had a way of thanking them, a really consistent way of thanking them for being that reference, and, providing them with additional information, maybe a small gift, something like that, that helped them to feel appreciated. So it was more of like a customer appreciation program too than anything.
That's great. Yeah. And it can almost form those bonds more, right? If you're having more interaction, you're giving them gifts or giving them more value, that's kind of can help, mesh your organizations even more.
Yeah. And I think the standardization of building a program like that is really, really critical, because you're right. You always do have the rogue sales rep who's just going to call up all the colleagues and say, hey, I need a reference. Who can I use? And I think when the salespeople see the benefit that their customers get from being involved in the program, they're more apt to follow the standardization as well. And really, it's about doing what's best for the customer. Not just the existing customer, but the prospect. And I think that the more you can show them the value of that, and not just for this specific example, but for any examples, the more you can show them the value of that, the better off you're going to be, and the more credible you're going to be with your sales team as well.
100%. Absolutely. This is awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit switch gears a bit and go to KPIs. Everyone's talking about key performance indicators. Everyone has new ones that pop up all the time. And Hillary, how are you measuring success to ensure you're aligned with your sales orgs, and what are those the key KPIs that you're looking at?
So, and I kind of want to make sure that I understand the question correctly. And we measure a lot of things in terms of the sales cycle and the sales process, and how long it takes for a lead to get from one stage to another. And we measure a ton of different things. When it comes to what matters for our sales team, there are really three things that we care about. There's there's booking, there's pipeline build, and there's conversion rates. And those are the things that are really going to tell us, like, if the sales rep's healthy, if the territory's healthy, if the region's healthy. And those are going to be kind of the indicators of what we need to do to go dig into. And then all of the other things that we measure are kind of underground, right? And we look at them as leading indicators. We don't necessarily spend a ton of time looking at those things unless there becomes an issue, right? Does that make sense?
Totally.
So those are
almost like working backwards a little bit. If there's a problem here, then we'll start getting more granular with what we're looking at.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the things that are really important to us. And I mean, those are the things that help the sales management. So that's kind of where where I feel like we've been able to provide value. Those are the things that really help the leaders to manage their teams better and to provide that support to their teams. And so when you're the one that's helping to provide those metrics, helping to make sure that they know really clearly when there's something not happening correctly, that's where you really start to become that partner to the sales management. And then you can, kind of move forward from there.
Absolutely. And is there anything specifically, so those are all, great indicators. Is there any specific indicator that you look at when you think about alignment? Like, is there anything that if you know what's off, then maybe operations and sales needs to get more synced up for that specific rep?
So, enablement falls under sales operations here as well, which we don't have a ton of enablement going on. Not to kid ourselves, but we definitely do look at pipeline build. I would say pipeline build is probably the biggest indicator that we look at, and there are so many things that can be contributed to either building enough pipeline or not building enough pipeline. And so it's kind of I wouldn't say it's something that we look at from an alignment perspective necessarily, but it's something that really helps us to go, okay, here's a problem. Like, let's go dig into where the issue might be, right? Because there could be an issue with enablement. There could be an issue with lead development in that territory, in that region. There could be, it's a gateway into a lot of different things that we should potentially look into. And so I would say that's kind of the biggest thing that we're focused on in terms of, knowing what could potentially be a problem.
Makes total sense. I like it. And Laura, anything else, other than those things that you're looking at Financial Force?
Yeah, I think so. From a KPI perspective, we're all mostly in the same bucket with some of the things that we measure just by nature in an ops role. So I'm going to come maybe at this with a slightly different perspective, although I was going to mention enablement as well, because that does fall under operations in our world too. However, not represented in that 9 ops people number. But we actually do try to pay a lot of attention to the things that are happening within a team, and especially in terms of the time that it takes to do things. So the time that it takes for a rep to ramp, the time that it takes for a rep to get to their second deal, not just their first deal, because the first one could be a fluke for all we know. We're trying to take it things sort of like the next step further. And lately, we've been really focused on the time that it takes to execute various processes in the organization, because we found this one's kind of a simple thing to fix. It's not contributing to the larger KPI numbers directly, but it indirectly does ultimately, because, as a rep, there's just nothing worse than doing admin work. And if it's difficult to do, then it just takes way too much time. And that's time that's really valuable and can be used elsewhere. Even just the frustration sometimes that you get out of working with certain systems that maybe aren't working well. We spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we can cut those things down. And then really kind of maybe the final comment and something else that we also went through internally. You've got marketing that's doing all these great dashboards and reporting. You've got sales ops doing their dashboards and reporting. You've got some other ones here and there. But what we realize is sometimes that the message that those two send, even though it can be on the same topic, but it's from different parties, it sounds very different. And what we had to do in our organization was acknowledge that, first of all, because we had some contention around sales versus marketing, especially. Marketing is like, leads are on fire. Sales is like, no, they're not. We had to really dig in and start looking at things on a per territory level and getting that more granular view. But we also realized we weren't defining things in the same way. Like, what do you consider a response? What do we consider a response? What's a lead? What's an MQL? We have to really get on the same language. And that actually changes the way we look at reports, because those reports were a point of frustration for sales, especially when they were on the weekly marketing call. And now we're actually talking in the same language. So it doesn't feel like one's trying to fool the other.
Yeah.
That is so interesting that you say that. And I think every organization is so similar when it comes to, the challenges that they have from a sales operations perspective, because we recently just went through this exact same thing where we had to redefine, at what point a lead was an MQL versus an SAL versus an SQL. And that has been really helpful in terms of making sure that we're reporting on the same things, that we're not, from an operations perspective, spending all of our time reconciling data, because no one wants to do that. So it's really interesting to hear that you have those same challenges, because we've recently gone through the same thing.
And it's where sales ops becomes the glue again, right? Between sales and marketing. And, and it bodes really well in terms of becoming that sort of representative and advisor for sales, that trusted, partner for sales, because we're helping them make sense of the stuff that doesn't make sense to them right now. And we're helping marketing understand why it didn't make sense to sales in the first place, and sometimes you just got to help people communicate in a way that will, kind of work for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Great points. Again, defining the language, so unbelievably key. I've been in many situations where, someone says, hey, I got a meeting booked. And so they're marking that as meeting booked. And it could be that it was one quick cold call and they said, sure, or whatever, versus, marketing thinking that it is a real discovery call. And it can definitely, a lot of misalignment can happen. And then I also like the point around, once you've set up the processes, looking at how long it takes your reps to execute on those processes and try and shorten that. And to me, that's kind of this new idea of revenue efficiency. I hear this thrown around a lot these days, is this idea of revenue efficiency. So let's dive into that quickly. What role does sales ops play in making their sales team more revenue efficient? And Laura, I'll start with you on this one.
I think the biggest contribution, and we've touched on this essentially, I think, throughout most of the conversation, but that biggest contribution comes from understanding every process, not just the one process in sales, really understanding, but even that process, understand it from a salesperson's perspective. Don't allow your preconceived notions of what happens in the sales process cloud reality, because all you're doing is, missing out on really valuable information that could help you manage the situation better, be more proactive. So I think ops really needs to see talking to sales as a really big asset and a really big value prop. But then being able to zoom out again and see how everything works together, identify the bottlenecks and the things that are just straight up broken, really prioritize fixing those. I think that's the greatest contribution that you can bring to efficiency on a larger scale. And out of that, you get all these little opportunities too, even just understanding how to make an account page load faster, and you can get that done in a week, but it feels good to the reps, right? They feel heard. And I think all of these little things together make a really big difference, but it comes down to understanding the process, whether it's the macro process or the little pieces, when you really zoom deep into a specific section of it. And as you're making these changes, to keep in mind whatever process or, tool comes before and after too. If you can do that, I think you're in a position to really create a lot of success and to accelerate a lot of the motions across the organization.
Absolutely. And Hillary, anything to add when we talk about revenue efficiency?
So, I mean, I definitely agree with what Laura was saying, and my response to that would be really similar. I guess I would say the only thing that I would add is kind of a repeat of something that we've already said here, which is, not to assume that you understand, where the problems are. We all know what happens when we assume. We're typically wrong, and it's, it doesn't provide value to anyone. It doesn't provide value for you in your career, and it doesn't provide value to the sales team to become more efficient and more productive. And so I think really kind of being humble and being willing to relook at the processes, right? Like, I think a lot of times operations, well, we put these processes in place and they're the best processes. Well, we might have missed something in that, and you got to be humble about what you're doing and make sure that they really are the best processes. And if they're not, it's okay. You've done it, you've done the best that you could do, and it didn't work. So you got to kind of shift and find another way of approaching it to help the sales team. I mean, I look at my job as, what makes our sales team more efficient and able to complete their job. And that's what I am motivated by. And I think that that's something that, all of sales operations probably has a hand in, is helping the sales team to do their job more efficiently. And it's really about just making sure that you really haven't made those assumptions and that you really do understand where the problems are, and that, you are able to prioritize, making the adjustments that are needed to fix them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it's about stripping away all those preconceived notions or assumptions that you've had, and then just constantly iterating on the processes, because they may have worked at one point and it could be 6 months down the line, they're not working anymore. So you have to be able to adapt.
Yeah, and not to a point where change management becomes really hard, because that's a whole new concept, right? If you're constantly changing things, then it's not necessarily the right way either. So there's always a fine balance there.
Yeah, that could be a whole other webinar. Maybe we'll have to do that one, part 2. Okay, so I know a big part of, sales ops is, introducing these new technologies to support these processes that you're building out. And I know whether you're a sales leader or even an AE who wants to make some, positive changes in organization, this can be difficult to get implemented. So I wanted to walk through, what's your decision-making process first about introducing new technologies? And then second, what are the most critical pieces in your current tech stack? And Hillary, I'll start with you.
Awesome. So we have a pretty stringent, self-inflicted, stringent process for implementing new technologies. We don't have a huge tech stack. Okay. I wish that we did have more of a tech stack. I wish, I'm jealous of Laura's 9-person team. We have a 5-person team. And so we run really lean. You would think that implementing new technologies would help you, be more efficient as a sales operations team. But as Laura mentioned earlier in the webinar, that's not always true. There is always something that needs to be done with those technologies. They have to be proactively managed. And so knowing that, we don't often get ourselves in with new technologies quickly. We have a pretty formal pilot process. There are very few technologies that we will implement without having a pilot process and very clear ROI guidelines and how to get to that ROI. We really will only, another challenge that we've had at this organization is getting the buy-in, or not getting the buy-in, but getting the usage. And so that's a lot of times while I'll make the sales team pilot it. It's like, okay, well, if you really want this tool, or if I really want this tool, I need to know it's going to be used. And too many times in my career, I've implemented a tool that wasn't used by the sales team, and I'm just not really interested in doing that any longer. It's not good for anyone. And so we go through a pretty heavy pilot process. And oftentimes, like, for example, one of the tools that we use is Outreach, probably one of my favorite tools on the market. And we went through a pilot process with a group of people who were totally not a fit for the tool. And the pilot was a miserable fail. But what it helped me to see was that actually there are lots of people at the company who this would be a really good fit for. So halfway through the pilot, we pivoted. I got it in the hands of a few other people who were immediately successful with it, use it on a daily, hourly, minute by minute basis, and basically live and breathe with it, right? And so that was one of the cool things about doing the pilot. It really helped us to understand what wasn't going to work, but it helped us to really open our eyes and see what would work. Yeah. So that's one of the tools we use. We use a tool called Clary for forecasting, which was pretty plug and play. Although, it's never 100% plug and play. There always has to be more to be done. There's always more to be done and more engagement to be had with your team. And then we use a tool called People AI, which is a newer tool for those of you who are interested in email automation and enablement. It's actually a really cool tool. Little plug for them. But that one's definitely not been easy to implement. So, you kind of have to go in eyes wide open with these tools and get a really good understanding of what you're taking on and making sure that you have the right resources to be able to do it. So we're not, we don't eagerly jump into new tools here. We're pretty picky and choosy.
Yeah. I think it's super important. I've definitely been on the flip side of that at like a startup that's like, let's just get everything and then we'll be, 50 times more efficient. And then it just gets confusing. It actually creates massive inefficiencies because you're jumping in between too many tools. They never get properly adopted, because you're on to the next thing. And they end up kind of just becoming temporary Band-Aids. And then someone has to go in and, re-audit everything and strip it all away. So
yeah, exactly.
I think it's definitely good to err on the side of more stringent processes.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say about tools, and then I'll let Laura share. I think the most important thing is that as you're implementing a tool, you're standardizing it, right? Standardization is really important for scalability. This is something that has become really relevant at Barracuda lately because we haven't standardized a ton of things. We've kind of just let people do what they do to be successful, which works probably when you're a smaller company, but as you're growing and looking to get, increased revenue, increased productivity, that standardization is super key. And so as we're implementing tools, that's one of the things that we look at is, can we standardize this through an entire group? And if we can't, we're not likely going to buy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point for sure.
I love that point.
Laura, over to you.
I love that point too, because that's actually something that's become really top of mind for us too. One of the things we try to do in general, and especially when we take a pilot but kind of across the board, we try to replicate what we know definitely is working in one piece of the business in the other pieces of the business. So a couple of things that we just took out recently, our EMEA team just crushed it last quarter. They really crushed it. And they have some new leadership too. So we spent a lot of time understanding, okay, what kind of changes were made there? How can we replicate them in, North America and Australia and so forth? In terms of tool selection process, I was kind of giggling a little bit because we've sort of evolved. When we were more of a team of, 4 maybe, but just most of the last 2 years, we were also really hungry for technology, and we were under the kind of leadership that really loved technology and like progressive stuff, like, oh, AI this, if it had AI in it, like machine learning, great, we want to know about it.
Sign us up.
Right? But what we really kind of realized we had to do, because it's nice to move fast and iterate, but it's to really take a step back and look at what's the business problem we're trying to solve. So for us, it really starts with talking to sales. First, we spend a good amount of time talking to them about their problems. What is a problem? Like, give us the laundry list. We try to identify the areas where we think we can make the biggest impact. Then we have an internal conversation about our bandwidth and where is the time suck related to these problems on our end, so that whatever path we go down to correct before we even consider a tool is fully vetted in terms of like the impact and the time savings across both teams. Because in the end, if the time savings is just on the one team, but I have to take half of the ops team to go implement it, that is also going to be a challenge. So being super cognizant of the level of effort to implement these things, the baby step concept, I think that goes really well for small teams. And then we go into like a very formal evaluation. We love our pilots as well. So same boat as you, Hillary, on that end, and try to be as selective in terms of looking at the whole picture and the value that is provided across the board. How well can this scale, be maintained? Is it really going to, kind of provide, do we have other tools that provide the same functionality and things like that? I know we're running short on time, but I would say making sure that you really understand what your current set of tools also does has helped us to not have to buy another tool on certain occasions.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And especially because a lot of these tools are advancing so quickly that before you ever purchase any other tool, make sure you go to, some of the technology partners that you work with and be like, hey, do you have this today? And is this coming on your roadmap? Because it's pretty crazy, all the bells and whistles that are coming on some of these technologies these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So we are running to the end. We do have some great questions, but what I'm going to do is urge you to reach out directly to Hillary and Laura with your questions. Best place to find both of you: email, LinkedIn, Twitter. Where do you both live?
LinkedIn's good.
LinkedIn's probably the best place.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, yeah, that is our time. So thank you both so much. And before I let you go, just quickly, for those people who aren't familiar with Barracuda and Financial Force, how are you guys helping the business world today? And I'll start with you, Hillary.
Yeah, so at Barracuda, we provide simplified IT solutions for the everyday IT professional. So that's kind of what we do. Not in the high-tech world necessarily from a, Financial Force, Salesforce area, but we do lots of IT. So if you have IT needs, feel free to hit us up at Barracuda.
Awesome. Thank you. And Laura?
Sure. So what we offer is ERP on the Salesforce platform. So these are your stodgy back office systems, but we've now brought them onto the same platform where you have the entire rest of your business. And the idea here is that you can look at your customer in all aspects of that kind of 360 sort of customer view concept to really understand how your entire business is revolving around the customer, how the things that you're doing up front translate into the money stuff in the back, which can help you drive a lot more in terms of, let's say, marketing, better marketing decisions as to how and where to spend your money, especially as it relates to your existing customer base. But the whole idea is kind of a big 360 view of everything that's happening around your customer in one system without having to do any integrations to other systems.
Awesome. Yeah. So if any of that's hitting home, reach out to Hillary and Laura. And Hillary, Laura, thank you so much for all your insight. It was an awesome conversation. And for everyone who joined us, thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.